All right, picking up from the last video. So previously, we talked about how we would use helper functions if we wanted to get information into our HTML wherever we use the spacebars notation. Then, if someone interacts with our HTML in the form of an HTML event, we call a specific event function. Now we want to complete the cycle. So we want the event to call an event function, and we want it to update the data in our application. Then, when that updated data happens, we want that to re-trigger our helper function and then put that updated data into our HTML. So I'm just going to move this around a little bit to make this flow clear here. So this is probably a better way to look at it. So the first thing will be, there'll be an HTML event, such as a click. That will call an event function, which will update some data. So second, it'll call the event function. 3 will update the data. Then 4, the updated data will then trigger our helper function to rerun, which will then put the new value into our HTML. So you should really remember here it looks like 6 different steps, but updating the data, and then having the updated data trigger the helper function are kind of the same thing. So we'll just go ahead and rewrite this one more time to make it a little bit clearer. So the first thing that happens is there will be an HTML event. Then we will update the data, which will trigger our helper function to rerun, which will then put a new value into our HTML. So we did these 2 steps and these 2 steps in the last video, but now we need to do our updating data piece. So let's go ahead and head back over to our code. So we currently have it such that when someone clicks on this button, it will trigger our event over here on the right. So now we want to increase our count for the number of times they click the button. So to do that, I am going to keep track of a variable. In this case, let's just call the variable x. Now, if I want to save that variable in a way to get this flow of these 5 different steps working, I need to use something called the session. So the session is nothing more than a map, very similar to a dictionary. So just in the same way you would look up in a dictionary a word, each word will then have a definition or a value. You can go to the wiki documentation that I've written if you want to learn more about the specifics of how the session works. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have a default value for the session. So to do that, we'll do session.setDefault. Then on the value for x, we'll say 0. So initially when they load our app, the value will be 0. Now we want to return, let's do it in the order of these things here. So we've initialized our data. Now when the HTML event occurs, we want to call our event function. So that's going to happen right in here. And in here, that's where we want to increase the value by 1. So in order to do that, I need to read the current value of the session out. So let's make a temporary variable for that. So we'll say current value. We'll set that equal to session.getX. So now this will return, it'll go into that dictionary, it'll look up x, and it will return the current value into this variable. Then we want to update the value for x inside of session. So we'd say session.set for x, and then the second parameter here, what I'm going to fill in this spot right here, is current value plus 1 because we want to increase the count. So current value plus 1. Now, we've had the click, our event function gets called, and we're updating the data. But our helper function won't automatically rerun and put the new value in HTML because our helper function is still set to return 1 right now. So if we go to our app, just to demonstrate this, you can see it still says 1 time, even though we have this session variable going. So to complete the loop, to get all 5 of these steps working, the helper function needs to return the session value. So where we have return 1 right now, just like how we read the value for x off session right down here, we need to do the same thing in this spot. So we'll say session.get x. And now all 5 of the steps should be working correctly. So the first thing that we'll do is they'll click on a button. Then that will run the click button event function. We'll read out the value of x off the session. Then we will increment it by 1 and save that updated value into x with session.set. Now, because session is a reactive variable, every helper that does anything with session.getX, such as this one up here, will automatically be rerun. So let's just start through that flow one more time. So we load our app, session is initially 0. Someone clicks on the button. It calls our event function. We read out the current value of x, which is 0. We then increment it by 1, so now it's 1, and we set that updated value into x. Since our count helper up here is automatically returning the value for x, it will be re-triggered because it will know that, oh, since we're calling session.getX and we just called session.setX, that means this helper needs to rerun. And when it reruns, it will put the new value of x into our HTML. We'll then see 1. So if we go to our app and reload, so we've clicked the button 0 times, and now it's reactive and keeps counting up. Session does only exist for as long as the user is on your web page. And if they reload or come to your web page for a fresh time, it will reset to its set default value. If you wanted to persist the data between reloading the page, you would need to use a collection instead, which I will be covering in the next video.